than the way in which people have traditionally understood it. It's not materialistic, it's not idealistic, it's not dualistic. It's actually a biblical theology. It's a sacramental theology. It's a biblical philosophy, very much grounded in that. And this has often been one of the weaknesses of traditional Christian theology, is it's been wedded very much to Greek philosophy, because they had somebody like St. Augustine, for example, who based his theology upon Plato, and very heavily Platonistic. And then you had someone called Thomas Aquinas, who based his whole philosophy and theology upon Aquinas. I'm not saying that Plato and Aquinas weren't brilliant and profound philosophers, but their philosophy wasn't biblically based. Whereas the principle is philosophy is biblically based in a way I think traditional Christian philosophy hasn't been. And in that sense it's actually much closer to Judaism. And partly this comes from its sort of Taoism as well, I think. Anyway, so next question then, if we understand a little bit about the nature of God, is why did God create the universe and why did God create me? So what is the purpose and meaning of life? Why did God create human beings? And also, what is the purpose of existence? So everything then, we could say, has a purpose, and the purpose is determined by the Creator, not by the created being or the created thing. So who decides what the purpose of a guitar is?
The maker.
Yeah, the maker. He gives it a purpose. And then if that purpose is fulfilled, then the maker is happy. And also you can imagine the guitar, if it had some consciousness, would also be happy. So supposing you made a guitar, and you're a very good guitar maker, and then you made this guitar, and then somebody called, is it John Williams, who's a great guitarist from my generation? Supposing he played the guitar and you were the one who made his guitar, and you were sitting in the audience listening to him, you would feel incredibly proud. You would tell people around you, I made that guitar. You know, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be able to produce such extraordinary music. You have this incredible sense of pride. But on the other hand, if you made something to produce music, and you saw somebody who was a bit of a thug, came across it and used it to brain somebody, bash them over the head, and like you see in the cartoons, you would feel heartbroken, because you'd feel that the thing that you made has been misused. Its value hasn't been able to fulfill its value or its purpose. And so that's why it's very important then to try and understand, why did God create human beings? Because if there is a God, and if God did create us, then he created us for some purpose. So if we can understand what the purpose for which we were created was, or is, and we can fulfill that purpose, then at the same time we can fulfill our potential to the maximum. If on the other hand we don't understand what the purpose of life is, and we give our life a purpose which is different one with it. I want to get some sense of getting very close to it. So that's why happiness comes, when our desire is fulfilled. So if you're hungry and your desire is fulfilled, you're happy. If there's somebody you miss and you see that person, your desire is fulfilled and you're happy. So happiness then comes when our desire is fulfilled. Yeah, so depending on what the desire is, then it experiences happiness. So what kind of objects then? Well, when I was young, I used to collect stamps. And anyway, I used to collect these stamps and stick them in my stamp album. I remember when the beginning of the summer came, I used to play outside all the time. And then when it came autumn, I went inside and I forgot all about my stamps, and it was rainy, I couldn't go outside. So I took the stamp album off the shelf and looked at it. And I was really surprised, because it's exactly the same way as it was when I left it. And I realized it didn't, whether I touched it or I looked at it or not, it wouldn't change. It was unchanging. It didn't really care about me in that sense. And I used to collect these little rocks. And when I went to see my mother, was it last year, I think it was, she said to me, this is the rock collection I had when I was about 6 or 7 or 8 years old. She said, "Do you remember that rock collection you had?" And I said, "Yes." "Would you like it?" Because I've kept it, for the last 50 years. I said, "Okay, I'll have a look." Anyway, so she brought it, and it was one of these little chocolate boxes, which I'd made into lots of little compartments, and I had all these little specimen rocks inside it, which I'd labeled this type of quartz and that kind of this and that kind of that. And I looked at it, and I hadn't looked at it for 50 years, but it was exactly the same as it was the last time I looked at it, when I was a little boy. And I realized these rocks have been here for millions of years. After I die, they're still going to be here for millions of years. They don't need me in that sense. They're just there. I can dust them, I can polish them, but they don't depend upon me at all. So I realized the depth of relationship I can have with a rock is relatively shallow. Except for ladies and their diamonds, of course. But then, when you're a child and you plant a little bulb and you water it and it grows, and you realize that this flower, this plant, depends upon me. If I didn't water it, it would have died. So you can have a closer relationship with a plant than you can with a rock. But again, if you try and pick it and take it for a walk, it dies. And so that's why people often want to have a pet. They start off with a hamster or a mouse, and then a cat, a dog. And you have a much closer relationship with an animal than you can with a plant or a rock, because we have much more in common with an animal than we do with plants or rocks. And if you've got a dog, you can train your dog to do tricks, and do also, play games with it, all sorts of things. You can become very, very close to a pet. Very, very close to, people often say a dog is a man's best friend. But there again, supposing you're a poet, and you take your dog for a walk, and you sit down on the park bench, and you say, "Oh, look at the sunset. What do you think of that beautiful sunset?" And the dog's sitting there, goes woof woof. Then you take out your poem and you read your poem to the dog, and the dog goes woof woof, if you're lucky. So, you can have a very close relationship with it, but there's a limitation to the depth of the relationship you can have with a dog or with any other creature. So people also want to have human company. They have friends, people you can talk to and share not just your poems, you can talk to about this and that and the other, and you can gossip, you can talk about all sorts of things. And so we form friendships with people with whom we have something in common. So we enjoy those, and when we see our friends, we're happy. And so, after a while, sometimes people find somebody they feel, I find someone they love, they feel I can share everything with this person. You long to find somebody we can talk to, we can share our heart, our mind, our ideas, everything with that person. That person can understand us and is able to respond. Yes, a dog can't. Many human beings can't. But eventually try and find someone you can actually feel you can actually share your whole heart with, and that person has the capacity to be able to receive everything you want to say and can respond. Yes, that's what we long for. You find somebody like that, you feel, I want to spend the rest of my life with this person. Because with this person I can be myself. I don't need to be something else, I don't need to put on any kind of mask or anything. I can just be myself, and this person loves me unconditionally just the way I am. And this person understands me just the way I am. And you feel this person, and you feel you want to share the whole of my life with this person, and then grow old together. So it's my wife's often like this. She sees an old couple walking down the street with walking sticks. Several times she pointed out, I hope we're like that in the future. And I look at them and I think, what with sort of all these wrinkles and walking sticks and with a bent back, that's what you want to become like. But this sort of idea, of just growing old together and just becoming closer and closer. And so this is what the principle says then. We experience joy when we have an object in which our own nature is reflected and complemented. An object which stimulates one to feel and discover ourselves. And there are people like that. You find through a relationship with this person, you discover you discover yourself through that person. Yeah? You find yourself reflected in this person, complemented and stimulated, and becomes a relationship that gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper as the years go by. So those are the kind of objects. So if that is the way that, if that's how joy is produced then you can imagine, if that's the way that we are, that's probably the way that God is. God also has created the universe because he wanted to have an object with which he could share his heart. Yeah? And that's why God created us in his image and likeness. And so, which is more stimulating then? And it says in the principle, our object partner helps us to feel our own internal nature and external form through the stimulation it gives. So the question is then, can God discover or know himself by himself? If you need an object partner to be able to feel your own internal nature, so does that apply to God as well? Yeah, well, I guess so. Hello, welcome. Right, yes. So that's interesting. So you find, and so again, the principle says, when the idea alone is the object partner, it is not as stimulating, nor is the joy as profound as from a finished work. So, for example, you may be a painter, you may have an idea of a painting, but is that satisfying for very long? You may get really inspired by this idea, wow, I'm going to paint this kind of picture. But if you don't do it, what happens to that inspiration? It fades, doesn't it? What makes, if you're got married, what will make you happy? The idea of having children or actually having children? Obviously, actually having them. Yeah, there's something which is substantial. And so what would make God happy? The idea of a perfect object or a substantial object. So that's why God created the substantial world, because God could have created all these things in his head, but it wouldn't have been a substantial experience of joy. You need to have, the joy is not as profound when you actually get a finished product. You may get a brilliant idea which really inspires you, but if you can actually make that substantial, then your joy is much more profound and much more complete. So God then wants to have a relationship of love with beings like himself. So that's why God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. So God then was looking for an object which he could love and which had the capacity to be able to receive his love and to be able to respond to that love. Yeah? So God created the universe, God created all these, the planets and the stars and the galaxies, and everything was created by God. And God, I'm sure, experienced incredible joy when he looked at it. But God was looking for something with which he could relate as an equal. Something he could relate and had the capacity to be able to understand him. So do rocks have the capacity to understand God? No. Do flowers have the capacity to understand God's heart? Do cats? So that's why God is waiting for a being and hoping a being would emerge that would have that capacity. And so that's why it says in the Psalms, I say you are God's sons of the Most High, all of you. Don't forget, just stop me if you want to ask questions. Don't let me just talk. So that's why it says, you're God's sons of the Most High, all of you. So it's the idea here that God created us to be as gods, which is really quite a shocking idea. Really. And so you look at the psalmist here, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have made. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Yet you've made him little less than God, and crowned him with glory and honour. So here the psalmist is looking at this amazing universe in which he lived, and he had this intuition, this sense, that the creator of the universe cared about him and was interested in him. And that's quite shocking. You know what I mean? You might think, well, for example, if the Queen phoned you up, how would you feel?
Honored.
Honoured. And you'd be surprised, wow, the Queen's interested in me. Yes? You'd be like, you feel really inspired. Or somebody incredibly important who you really loved and admired just phoned you up. You'd be, wow, that person knows my name. That person's interested in me. I thought they were so, high up. And so this idea that the God who created the universe actually is interested in me, knows me by name, is a really shocking idea, but a very profound idea. So that's why Father said, God's purpose for creating human beings is to experience joy through relating with ideal families filled with true love. So here's the idea that God wants to live and dwell with his children, as it says in the book of Revelation as well. Another reason why God created human beings is that God wants to interact with the creation. So God is invisible and without form. So because God is invisible without form, even though he created the universe, he can't rule it without a body. Does that make sense? God cannot rule the universe without a body. So what is the world like when it's ruled by God? Just alone.
When it's created by God.
Well, okay, supposing you had a patch of grass. Supposing I said, well, I'm going to let God look after my garden. How would it turn out? Pretty wild, wouldn't it? Yes. And so God actually can't rule the universe without a body. Yes, it's sort of wild, but also, and very chaotic, but also very orderly. There's this, very deep order within the chaos. And so God created human beings as his body in that sense. And so by becoming one with human beings, God can experience the creation. So, by becoming through us, then God is able to do the gardening. God is able to experience getting his hands dirty. Yes? To experience the clay and the earth and planting something, growing something, and experimenting, as scientists do, and maybe tweaking a little DNA to try and modify it a little bit. God can, through us, God can have dominion over the creation. But without human beings, God has no body. God can't have dominion over the created world. The world is in what we call the indirect dominion of God. Yeah? Oops. So if God is invisible and without form, on what basis is it possible for God to be involved in the process of designing? You have some people talk about intelligent design. So if God is invisible without form, how can he engage in intelligent design? Is that possible?
Yes. My understanding is that God configured the nature of the energy before it transmuted it to matter and everything, knowing that what course it would take from matter to particles to galaxies, but he only did it as far as bringing forth the evolution of his children, and then we're supposed to take it from there. So to that extent, I feel like God predicted where everything would end up.
You think so?
Yeah.
I don't think he knew how it would turn out at all, to be honest. I think the whole thing... I think he knew that I think he set it up so that one day, somewhere, life would appear which had consciousness and with which he could form a relationship. But I don't think he knew where it would happen. I don't think he knew when. I don't think he knew what it would look like. I think all these things are just happened. That's what I think. Because the question is, if God is without form and God cannot intervene and rule the universe because the universe is an indirect dominion of God, he must have been waiting then. He wasn't involved. That's what I think. Okay, so what's the relationship between man and creation? Well, God created us as beings of love, and through responding to God, then we are very beautiful to God and we experience joy. So when you see something very beautiful, how do you feel? You feel happy. Yeah? Or you listen to beautiful music, you feel happy. See a beautiful person, you feel happy, you experience joy. The person you love, you see them, they're very beautiful to you, experience joy. And so relationship, subject-object relationship. And so relationship we should have with the created world. Again, we should love and take care of the created world, and through this we can also experience joy. So the joy that we experience, that God experiences with us, we can experience in the created world, and then God can experience the relationship with the created world through us. So if we're supposed to become like God, the question is then, how can we become like God? How can we become like the body of God? How can we become the dwelling place of God, the incarnation of God? As Paul said, be imitators of God as beloved children. So if you want to imitate God, if you want to become like God, what do you need to know?
You need to know the principles of the process of creation.
Okay.
To some extent.
All right. What else do you need to know? If your goal is to become like God, what do you need to know? You need to know what God is like. Yes. You need to know what God is like. So let's have a look. What is God like? Now, we looked at before this idea of internal and external masculinity and femininity. But if we look at the internal dimension of the nature of God, you say the principle says God is a being of heart. And again, we looked at what heart is. The heart is a source of intellect, emotion and will. So God is a being of heart. And also God is a being of logos. So logos is a Greek word, and usually translated in the Bible as the word. But it's also got this, has all kinds of sort of associated meanings, like reason and law. And so God then is a being of reason and law. And so law is, you've got the laws of nature, which govern the relationships between things in the natural world. You also have the moral law, or ethics, which governs the relationship between human beings. And so ethics, or relationships in human beings, should be relationships of love. So you've got many different types of relationships of love, like relationships between parents and children, brothers and sisters, husband and wife, friends, uncles and aunts, cousins, and all these kind of relationships of love. And they're all quite different. And so ethics then is about relationships of ordered love. And so also God is very creative. So God created the universe. So if God is a being of heart, logos and creativity, what is the mechanism that God set up for us to inherit his heart, logos and creativity, to become like him? What's the mechanism? You'll know it when you come across it. What is it?
Life.
Okay. There's three things there. The three blessings, that's right. So to become like God, God gave human beings the three great blessings. So, as it says there, God blessed Adam and Eve, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. So God is a being of heart. So through the first blessing, to be fruitful means to inherit God's heart, to become a person and being sensitive to the heart of God. Then the second blessing, to inherit God's being nature of logos, God gave us the second blessing to multiply, to get married, to have children, to have a family. And through this to experience all these different relationships of love, and in that way to inherit God's nature of logos. And then God gave the third blessing, dominion. So through taking dominion over the natural world, we can inherit God's creativity. We could become like God in that sense. So by fulfilling the three blessings, we are fully human, but also we become fully divine, become like God. So let's have a look at the first blessing then, to be fruitful. So this is the ability to create and complete our character. So what does that mean, the ability?
Potential.
Yeah, we have the potential, we have the ability to create ourselves. So through everything that we think, say and do, we create ourselves. So the way I am today is a result of everything I thought, said and did in the past, and what I say, think and do today will affect the kind of person I become tomorrow. Does that make sense? Because that's an existential reality. We are the result. The way we are today is a result of all the decisions that we made in the past. You know, if we'd made a different decision, taken a different path, we would be different today. Does that make sense? That's just the way it is. We have that ability. So it's nothing to do with God in that sense. That's just an existential reality. We have the ability to create ourselves.
What do you think of the effect that your environment has on what you think can do?
Obviously it does. Again, how we react and respond to the environment is up to us. So if somebody says something to us, we can choose how we're going to react. If somebody insults us, we can, right, I'm going to smash your face in. Or we can say, okay, you know, I'm going to just swallow that and love this person unconditionally and try and help this person. So, you know, I mean, there's some people who come from exactly the same kind of background and environment, and because they make different decisions, they turn out very differently. You know, some people, in a certain situation, they make the wrong decision, they end up in prison. Some people overcome that temptation, make the right decision, and become very respectful member of society. So the environment doesn't control us, but it sort of creates a certain kind of parameters within which we can act. Does that make sense? So anyway, so yes, I mean, a lot of the things we think come from where?
From the environment.
Which is predominantly our family. I mean, a lot of the sort of script we have running around in our head, the tape that runs round and round and round and round and round, often that comes from our parents, and our family, our attitude towards life, our basic attitude towards life, the world in which we live, our basic attitude towards people. Often that is something which we get from our family. And of course we can change that if you come across different ideas, a different way of looking at the world. You can actually change the way you think. Yeah? So just because we think in a certain way because of our upbringing, if we encounter a different way of thinking, we can change. That's why sometimes people start to meditate, to change the way in which they think, or join, or study a philosophy, or engage in literature, or join a religious group. And through this, they can start to change the way they think, start to change the way in which they see themselves, and change the way in which they see the world in which they live. So, that's the idea here. We can change. It's not programmed. And so the goal then is, as Jesus said, to be complete as your Heavenly Father is complete. So it's usually translated as perfect, isn't it? Yeah? You should be perfect, your Heavenly Father is perfect. But that's because it's written in Greek, and the Greek means perfect. But behind the Greek there's a sort of Aramaic and Hebrew, and it doesn't mean perfect, it means complete. It just means mature, which is more attainable, to be complete or to be perfect.
Complete is not
complete, right?
But you're never complete because you're always evolving, and God is evolving. So that also is not correct.
Okay. But the idea is perfection never attainable.
Depends what you mean by that.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Really
It's not
depends.
static.
Not static.
I mean, if you're a perfect driver, for instance, then it means you can push the limits of how you use your skills in that area.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it means, perfect.
Yeah. I'll be a good driver, yeah.
That means, for instance, you're acting within the principles of
Yes.
creativity and best results and best consequences.
Okay, yeah. I mean, usually the idea of perfection is that there's something without any flaws.
Yeah.
When we look at the world in which we live, there's always flaws, aren't there?
Yeah.
And so perfection in that sense is something unattainable, and it's like an unattainable ideal.
Well, you're using perfection in the sense that it was used, for instance, you discarded that whole dualistic kind of static against moving thing, and now you're using that.
I am.
Actually perfect.
Yes, I'm using it like
in
that,
that sense, yes.
because that's the meaning of the dictionary.
Is it? So is perfect static?
No, not static, but it's something without flaws. It's flawless. Not necessarily static, it's flawless. And this comes very much from the sort of Platonic idea of these perfect forms, which, can never be perfectly embodied. Anyway, as I said, and that's why, whereas a complete, it means you just become mature, you just become grown up, it's something much more attainable. It doesn't mean you're flawless, it doesn't mean you never make mistakes. But there's something which is perfect, there's somebody who never makes mistakes, is kind of unattainable ideal. Whereas a mature person may still make mistakes, they might still stub their toes, they might still have accidents, even when they're driving. The Messiah, for example, is the Messiah supposed to be perfect, or just in the sense of never making mistakes? What do you think? Can the Messiah make mistakes? Yes. Yeah, so in that sense you could say the Messiah is not perfect because he makes mistakes. Because the traditional understanding of the word perfection is something which is completely flawless. Anyway, which I think is unhelpful. So I think it's much better just to say complete or mature. And a lot of this then is about the relationship between our mind and body. So we have a mind and body, and what's important about growing up then, and for creating ourselves, is a relationship between our mind and body. So let's have a look at that. So our mind, we pursue beauty, truth and goodness, and our body, we have certain desires. We're hungry, we want to eat. We're tired, we want to go to sleep. We want to be warm and have shelter. And as we get older, we have a sexual desire as well. And so these two should be fulfilled together. They shouldn't be separate. And so part of growing up then is learning to get the mind-body unity. So our mind is subject and our body is object. So as I said, when you're a baby and you're hungry, when do you want to be fed? Now! Now! You don't want to wait. And part of growing up is learning delayed gratification. Learning, just wait until it's lunchtime. Just wait until it's supper time. Yes? You just learn how to wait. You learn to postpone, you're hungry, but just wait until it's the right time to eat. And then you eat in the right time, and you eat in the right place, and you instead of stuffing yourself secretly, you eat, it becomes something like a social meal. And so that's what growing up is learning how to control these things so they're fulfilled in the right way. And then, as I said, when we eat, we don't just think, oh, I'm hungry, I'm going to go and stuff myself, but we like to eat with a beautiful meal. So some people, when they arrange the table, it's a work of art, it's a beauty, you just looking at it, the salads, the food, everything's laid out so elegantly and beautifully. And then it's an expression of beauty. So eating then should be an expression of beauty. And when we eat, we should eat how? Yeah, you learn how to eat well, good table manners. And so when you're a baby, when a baby starts to eat, it starts to feed itself, and most of the food goes all around its mouth and on the floor. And what do the parents do? You get a camera out and take a photograph, and it's really funny. But supposing a child's still doing that when they're 6 or 7 years old, it's kind of embarrassing, isn't it? Yeah. So that's part of growing up, is learning to have good table manners, learning all these sorts of things. So it's the same with sleeping. So when you're a baby, you flop asleep anywhere, you just fall asleep. Toddlers as well just fall asleep. But as you grow up, you learn actually there's a right place for sleeping. It's called your bed. And before you get into bed, you get undressed and put on your pajamas. You don't just go to bed with your regular daytime clothes on. You get changed. And you go to the bathroom and you clean your teeth. And before you get into bed, you say your prayers. Yeah, so it becomes a ritual. So sleeping then becomes ritualized. It becomes something which is spiritualized. So instead of just fulfilling the physical desire, you actually invest that with something meaningful. Just like eating then becomes a meaningful activity. And that's why a lot of religious activities are feasts. It becomes a holy meal, like communion. Yeah? And then same with shelter. We don't just want to live in a little cave somewhere. We want to live in a beautiful environment, a beautiful house, which is an expression of who we are. People take a lot of time choosing the wallpaper and the curtains and this, that, and the other, to try and create a beautiful house. And so all these physical desires then should be fulfilled and should be an expression of beauty, truth, and goodness. And also sexual desire as well should also be an expression of beauty, truth, and goodness. And so again, part of growing up is learning not only to eat in the right time, place and way, sleep in the right time, etc., but also sexual desire should also be fulfilled in the right time, the right person, in the right way, and should be an expression of love. Yeah, not just to try to satisfy one's physical urge, but should be an expression of love, of giving love to somebody else. So growing up then is developing this mind and body unity. And if we don't do this, it becomes a problem. So for example, we should eat in order to be able to live. But then a greedy person is someone who lives in order to be able to eat. So if our body dominates our mind, then it becomes a problem. So when I was at university, I know Martin was a whole story of 10 hours. Anyway, I remember when I was sitting writing this essay when I was at university, and I made all the notes, a couple of weeks, reading all the books, making all the notes. I was sitting there writing, all the ideas are flowing, it all was writing away. My essay was going really well. And I've been sitting there for a while and started to get a bit peckish, a bit hungry, but I ignored it, carried on writing. And then after a while, my stomach started rumbling, and I couldn't ignore it. And I thought, well, I'll just go into the kitchen and have a little snack, and then I'll come back and finish my essay. So I went into the kitchen, and I made myself a peanut butter and jam sandwich, and I ate it. And I thought, that was nice. I could manage another one of those. So I had another second peanut butter and jam sandwich. And I had a third peanut butter and jam sandwich. And by that time, I was completely bloated and completely stuffed. And I thought, right, now I'll go and get on my essay. And I sat down, I picked up my pen, and I couldn't write another word. Then I realized, because I'd given into my physical desire, I'd killed my spirit. My body had killed my mind. All the inspiration was lost, because I'd given into my physical desire. So I realized then a lot of it is just about that, getting to mind-body unity. So mind is subject and body is object, and the body then becomes an expression of beauty, truth and goodness. Through our physical body, through all our physical actions and everything we do, we express beauty, truth and goodness. And then we become a true person. And so one of the key points of this is mind-body unity. So people often do learn this through ballet, through dance, or through martial arts. And when you watch somebody who's doing ballet or martial arts, it's something extraordinarily beautiful to watch. If you watch me doing it, it wouldn't be. When you watch somebody who's got that mind-body unity, it's just beautiful to watch it, isn't it? Sort of perfection in motion, in that sense. That's one aspect of this mind-body unity. And that's why people often do these kind of sports. Because when you get this mind-body unity, there's such incredible concentration, you get this incredible flow of energy. And afterwards you feel incredibly elated. And so a lot of it's about mind-body unity, about concentration. So you watch somebody playing snooker, you can see they're completely focused, completely concentrated in what they're doing. And if they lose concentration, what happens? The ball doesn't go into the pocket. Or if you're doing something, fencing or doing something, you lose concentration, you lose the point. So that's what it's about, mind-body unity, being able to completely concentrate. And if you want to study and read a book, it helps to be able to concentrate. Because if you've always been distracted, you keep coming back, what was that paragraph about? You have to keep going back, and you never get anywhere, so you can't concentrate. And so that's why sometimes people do meditation. Through meditating, you learn how to focus your mind and body and become completely one. And you can concentrate, and you can study, and you can read very, very fast, and you can remember what you've read. Because you can concentrate, you're completely focused, you can penetrate to what is the real issue here. But if you're distracted, you can't concentrate, you can't get to the nub of the problem. What's really going on. So that's why concentration is very important. That's why you want to learn a spiritual discipline like meditation. It's a very good thing to do. And another aspect is words and deeds becoming one. So words and deeds becoming one is like keeping promises. And so timekeeping is again a very important part of that. Not prevaricating. Learning to say, okay, I'm going to do this, and then you say I'll do it, and you do it. And so I'm going to meet you at this time, and then you arrive at that time. And that's one of the most remarkable things about Jesus, was there was no difference in what he said and what he did. So Jesus said you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul and strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. He also said you should love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you. And you might think, well, it's easy to say, but what's so remarkable about Jesus is that's actually what he did. That when he was being crucified, at that moment he said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. So he asked God to forgive the people who were putting him to death. So there's no difference in what Jesus said and what he did. He practiced what he preached. He was completely that kind of person, a mature person, complete unity in his mind and body. He's completely wholehearted in whatever he did. And so again, when we do something, you should do it in a wholehearted way. So for example, if you're washing the dishes and you don't like washing the dishes, how do you feel?
Finish quickly and get
What?
Finish quickly and get back to the TV.
Okay, but do you actually enjoy the experience of washing dishes?
No.
No. And what? And at the end, do you feel you got more or less energy?
Less. Less.
Less energy. Whereas if you actually put your heart into washing the dishes, actually it can become something very meaningful, and actually you get more energy and you can enjoy it. And you might think, well, how is it possible to enjoy doing the dishes? Well, lots of people, that's what they do. And if you think, right, this is a dirty dish, I'm going to really polish it, make it clean and make it like new, because I want the person who's going to eat off this dish to really be able to enjoy it. So if you're thinking, suppose you were washing dishes for your family, your children, you want them to eat off something clean, so you make sure you're going to make it nice and clean, so for the person you're doing it for. Or you can think, I'm going to, if you're like witnessing, you can think, right, witnessing is like restoring people. So through washing this dish, getting all this dirt off and making it clean, I'm doing this as if I was restoring and witnessing to somebody. Yeah? So you make all these activities as something very meaningful. That make sense? That's what Father often does. He does all this fishing and all sorts of other things. And when he's doing it, he's thinking in that sort of way. So what look like external activities are actually, for him, filled with extraordinary meaning. So we can do the same ourselves. Again, it requires mind-body unity. You actually concentrate and focus upon what you're doing. Apart from the fact that if you're distracted when you're washing the dishes, you probably drop one and they get broken. And another aspect is, the most important aspect here then is the sensitivity of the heart of God. To be able to, through his mind-body unity, to be able to feel the presence of God and to be able to feel how God feels. So when you see somebody, you can empathize, you feel how they feel. And children are often like this. I remember when I was a child, 5 or 6 years old, when I saw somebody mistreating another child, I used to cry. Because I could feel that child's suffering as my own. As I got older, I became less sensitive. Not the way it's supposed to be. But anyway, that's the way we should be. We should be very sensitive to the heart of God. We should feel how God feels, feel how other people feel. Be able to empathize. And so this is mind-body unity. And then God is a being of intellect, emotion and will. And then we also have an intellect, emotion and will. And so emotion then is about feeling. So we should, and what our emotion pursues and desires is beauty. When we see beauty, we feel happy. And we should feel the way that God feels. Our feelings should be the same as God's feelings. In our intellect we think, and we pursue truth. And so, just like God, and our will, with our will we do things. And so will should be directed towards goodness. And so, if we become one with God, then we feel what God feels. We think the way that God thinks. And our will is naturally to do what God wants. We naturally feel how God feels. We naturally think what God thinks. We naturally want to do good. It just becomes something completely spontaneous and natural, not something forced. The fulfillment of the first blessing then is like becoming the embodiment of the truth of God, becoming like a true teacher. So whatever we do, whether we like it or not, we create and express our character by everything we think, say and do. Let's have a look at some examples. Have you read the story of Oscar Wilde? Yeah. Dorian Gray. And there he is, This is the idea that everything you think, say and do creates your face. creates lines that are created on your face. So you can look at somebody and they're really old, and their character's written into their face. Anyway, so Dorian Gray, some magic happened, and he lived a really bad and dissolute life, but nothing that he did wrong showed in his face. His face still looked really innocent. But there's a painting which a friend of his had done, on which all the lines appeared. And so he hid the painting in his attic, and the painting then turned out to be incredibly ugly, which is like a mirror of his true self. Yes, this is that idea we create ourselves. And so it's what ladies often do. They try to paint their faces. And it's interesting, you watch a person, depending how they make themselves up, one reacts differently to them. You notice that? And so people want to put makeup on to create a certain kind of impression, to create themselves, or recreate themselves, the way they dress, or whatever. This is got a man who also is engaged in a bit of self-creation, body sculpture. There's a real picture. I looked at something even more extreme than this, I'm telling you. And he's obviously happy because he is the way that he wants to be. He wants to look like that. Sorry?
That can't be nothing from
They can. You Google it, and you find lots of people in different stages, and this is one of the more extreme, ones. So he's created himself. Do you think it's easy or hard to do that? Very hard. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Sorry? Steroids. Sort of meat, beef, steaks. Anyway, it's a lot of work. So he did it. And there you go, this person here decided to create himself, look like that. And when you do this, you create, people react to you differently, depending on how you present yourself, which is interesting. That's why people do it. There's a second lesson God gave to Adam and Eve was to multiply. So this is the ability to create a family and to form relationships with other human beings. But basically, whether we like it or not, we have parents. Whether we like it or not, we have relationships with other human beings. It's almost impossible to grow up without a relationship with another human being. And through our relationship with human beings, we discover ourselves and we develop ourselves and we form our identity. Our identity, our sense of self, is largely formed from our relationship with other human beings. The way in which our parents treat us, this develops very fundamentally our sense of self, whether we are valuable or not, whether we are lovable or not lovable, is from the way in which our parents treat us, the way our brothers and sisters treat us. We develop our sense of self, uncles, aunts, cousins, the next door neighbour, teachers. This forms very much our sense of self. Anyway, so God wants us to inherit his nature of Logos, which we can talk about in terms of these four great realms of heart. So there are many different types of love. So God is love. But love is the many different types of love. God wants us to experience all these different types of love. And so when we're born as a child, we experience the love that our parents have for us. And also we experience a certain kind of love for our parents. And what kind of love do children, when they're very young, have for their parents? Children often they treat their parents as God, don't they? Often they worship them, almost. They often think they're perfect. No one's perfect except my dad or something. Or I got the best dad in the world, the best mum in the world, yes? So I remember when I was living in Russia, I used to come back from the office, and then one of my boys, I think he was about 3 at the time, when I used to come back, he used to bring me my slippers every night when I came back, when I came home. And I thought, wow, he's perfect. Anyway, it only lasted for about a week. Anyway, so that's that kind of love, the kind of admiration, and you grow up and you have love experience of brothers and sisters, older brothers, younger older sisters, different kinds of love. And then it also is the love that a husband and wife have for each other. Again, it's a very different kind of love. So you want to have lots of friends, but the love between a husband and wife is something unique. And if you're married, do you want to share your husband or wife with anybody? No, not at all. You want that to be a unique kind of love, a unique relationship. Yes? You're happy to have lots of friends. You're happy to have, well, hopefully happy to have lots of brothers and sisters. But, you want this relationship between a husband and wife is one character-wise quality, this is a kind of uniqueness. And then, out of this related to love between a husband and wife, a couple have children. As an expression of their love, they have children. So children are an expression of the love that a husband and wife have for each other, and they become parents. And by becoming parents, you experience a different type of love, the love that a parent has for a child. Now, I remember when I was young, my mother often used to say to me, "You'll never understand how much we suffered for you and what we've done for you until you have children of your own." And it's true. When I think about it now, I must have driven my parents round the bend. And I think sometimes, how do they have the patience? And then, having children of one's own, sometimes you think, how did God manage? How is God so patient all this time? So through having children of one's own, one starts to understand one's own parents' heart and appreciate that. And through having children of one's own, one can understand God's heart, how God must feel. So that's what God wants. God wants us to understand His heart. So God wants us to experience everything that He's experienced. So that's because God can't share everything with us unless we have the capacity to be able to receive it. We can only have the capacity to be able to receive God's love if we've been through the same sort of experiences ourselves that God has been through. And through going through the experiences of having children and bringing up children, we can understand how God feels towards us and the suffering that God has gone through in His relationship with us. And also the incredible joy that God must feel as well. So that's why God gave us a second blessing. But through this, we can inherit all these different kinds of love. And so as it says here, St. John Chrysostom said, when a husband and wife are united in marriage, they're no longer seen as something earthly, but as the image of God Himself. So as a husband and wife united in marriage, that's the image of God. So no single individual is the image of God. A husband and wife united and become one in marriage, the complete unity of masculinity and femininity, in a harmonized union, that is the image of God, that is the expression of God.
Where is that quote from?
St. John Chrysostom. He was the patriarch of Constantinople, about 5th century, I think.
Can you read it again?
You need to get some binoculars, don't you? Yeah. When husband and wife are united in marriage, they're no longer seen as something earthly, but as the image of God Himself. That's just the traditional Christian teaching on this topic. And then, so through this, family is a school of love. We experience all these different dimensions, types of love. Now it says in the letter of John, if we love one another, God lives in us, and His love is made complete in us. I find that a very shocking verse when I read it. Do you think it's shocking? What do you think might be shocking about that statement?
Because it shows a relationship between God and us, which is interdependent, which is quite a new perspective.
Yes, because it means if means without us, God's love cannot be made complete. Without us, God's love cannot be made complete. Meaning without you, without me, God's love cannot be made complete. God cannot experience, without a relationship with each individual, God cannot experience Himself. God can only discover Himself through us. Because each one of us, who remembers an individual truth body, each one of us is an individual, unique expression of God. Each one of us can express God in a way that nobody else can express God. And through us, God can discover Himself in a way that He can't discover Himself with anybody else. Our relationship with God is something completely unique. So in that sense, no single individual can be the complete expression of God. Because only every single individual, even the Messiah, is only an individual truth body, an individual particular expression of the divine nature. But actually, every single individual should become like that, an individual expression of God's nature in that particular unique way. So each of us can bring joy to God in a particular individual unique way that nobody else can. Make sense? So in that sense, this then becomes the source of our value as an individual. We have infinite value, unique value, eternal value, divine value, because of our relationship with God. Peter?
And that corresponding aspect within God, did it pre-exist us, or did it also come into existence when we came into existence?
What do you think?
Well, because I'm thinking, even if all the people in the spirit world and the earth become perfect and reflect God and allow Him to get in touch with Himself, there's an infinite potential number of future people that exist. So however much God feels fulfilled in the people He can relate to, doesn't He also feel tortured by the people that don't yet exist, that can't relate to that unique aspect?
I wouldn't say it doesn't feel tortured.
Longing, a longing?
I'm just waiting, I guess. I'm surprised when they come along.
But according to the principle of infinity, that means God can never be completely fulfilled. Because
Well, that's right, because God is infinite and God is eternal. And as I said last time, that's what makes eternity bearable. The fact that there's infinite depth to the mystery of God. There's an infinite depth to the mystery of the person you're married to. There's an infinite depth to every single human being, which means we can actually spend infinity with each other, or eternity with each other, because we can never get to the bottom of each other. You know, we can never get to the bottom of ourselves, often we surprise ourselves. So I think every time an individual appears, I think God discovers part of Himself. But it's not just the ones that haven't been born. There's also an infinite number of people that never were born and never will be born. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Probably God is speculating about what's going to come next,
Yeah,
based on what He's already created.
Yeah, but I said there's an infinite number of human beings that were never born and would never will be born. So you think of all the different eggs there are in a single woman, and you think of all the different sperms in a single man, and you think of all the different combinations, and you think of the fact that out of these thousands of eggs, there's only a chance that half a dozen will ever be born, which means that 99.9% of all the potential human beings that could have been born aren't born. Does that make sense?
When people are waiting for their future partner, when they grow up and they feel there's something missing, they need to be complete, so they instinctively feel they want to find a husband or wife, because until they've met that person and made a relationship, they feel a current emptiness and almost like pain. So if God finds a partner every time a human being is come into being, then He discovers the partner Himself, that's okay.
Yeah.
But if He feels an infinite number of emptinesses, and that's causing him a longing and suffering.
Well, I don't think it does, you see, any more than if you're parents, and you know that 99.9% of the eggs that your wife has are never going to be fertilized, and 99.9% of the sperm you produce are never going to fertilize an egg. You don't have that endless torture about it, do you? Do you? Yeah, I don't think so. Anyway, so I'm just saying, it's just that's why we get our value from this unique relationship with God. And it's through this love then that we experience joy. So there's nothing that makes us happier than experiencing love. But if you're with the person you love, you feel joy, you feel happy. If there's somebody you love very much and you miss that person, when you see that person, your heart jumps for joy and you experience joy. The joy of the husband and wife, parents and children. So the whole purpose of life then is to experience joy, it's for joy. And so lots of different ways in these relationships are fulfilled, in the family, through friends, through work, through social life. And whatever we do, whether we like it or not, we form relationships with other people that are an expression of who we are. So often you notice, people form certain kinds of relationships with certain kinds of people. Some people are always getting into arguments with people. It doesn't matter who it is, they're always getting into an argument with them. But some people seem to get on well with everybody. And so the kind of relationships we have are very much a reflection of the kind of person we are. And part of it is learning to form relationships with all sorts of different kinds of people. First is St. Paul on love. They often think it's the profoundest expression or statement. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. I remember this idea of love being patient. Again, when my children were small, I remember one of them used to sit in the flat in Moscow, this long corridor with linoleum tiles. and he wanted me to sit at one end, and he would sit at the other end, just pushing a car up and down. And I thought, after I've done this half a dozen times, I started getting bored. We just wanted to keep on doing it again and again and again and again. So I just had to realise, yes, one just needs to be patient. I just need to put away all this philosophy and all this stuff. And just enjoy and get into pushing a car up and down the corridor until he doesn't want to do it anymore. Yeah? So be patient and kind. Not to envy or boast. Love is not arrogant or rude. Does not insist on its own way. So, willing to compromise. Not insist on your own way. Is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices at the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Yeah, you can spend a whole sermon on that, so spare you. And so there's different dimensions of God's love. And so it's love that creates life, and it's life that creates lineage. And God wants to dwell in and through our lineage. There are lots of different kinds of relationship. Man is, lots of different hats one wears. Sometimes one's, a son. Whenever I see my mother, she always treats me like I'm still, 40 years younger than I am. And, sometimes we're a husband, sometimes a father, sometimes a brother. Have lots of different hats we wear, lots of different roles that we play. As Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, so we wear lots of different hats, fit into lots of different roles. And third lesson, take dominion. So it's the right of dominion over the creation. So through this, God wants us to inherit His creativity. We can't go around creating universes, and hopefully we're not going to do that in CERN when it doesn't all go up in a black hole. And so God then wants to experience the creation through us, as I said before. And so it says that God took the man, Adam, and put him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. So the first job for human beings is to be gardeners, to look after the garden, to do the gardening, mow the lawn, cut the hedge, plant the flowers, etc., etc. Be a gardener, to create an environment, something beautiful. And I said God wants to do that through us. God can't do it by Himself. And then we're lords of creation. That's why God said to Adam, whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. So by giving a name to something, you're showing you have some kind of control or authority over it. And then we're like a microcosm of the creation. And so the relationship we should have with the natural world, we should be in harmony with the natural world. A relationship of harmony and oneness. And through this, to inherit God's creativity. So this comes out in all sorts of areas, this idea of dominion. So through this we develop our creativity, and through that we express ourselves. So people express themselves through the things that they create. And also we develop and perfect our skills. And develop a sense of responsibility and freedom that comes with owning something. There are lots of ways in which we can do this. We can do it through art, when you paint a picture. When you start painting, it's really difficult. The paint doesn't go where you want it to go, and you have to learn how to paint, how to mix the colours. And then after a while you learn how to paint, and you can paint what is inside your head. You can express what is inside you. Also through sculpture, through building things, through making things, people want to express themselves. Through, as I said before, through gardening, through farming, through music, through clothes, the way a person dresses is a form of self-expression and creativity. Through industry, through manufacturing, through fishing, through walking in the hills, through climbing, through cleaning a house, through driving a car, through ecology, stewardship, ownership. All these things are a way in which we can fulfill the third blessing. And whatever we do, whether we like it or not, we create the environment around us, which is an expression of who we are. So there's also, as I said, this idea of ownership. We should own something, be responsible for it. It is a very important idea here, that be a true owner. And so we create our environment. So let's have a look at this. This is a garden somebody's been looking after. And this one here is one which has been left to God. This is a nice house, looks like a very old house, but it's in good condition. And this one here is looking a bit neglected. This is a nice, clean, tidy bedroom. And this bedroom belongs to some nameless teenager. So we create our environment. You go into somebody's room, you can see it's like an expression of who they are. So the purpose of life then is to fulfill these three blessings, to be fruitful, to multiply, and to take dominion. And so this is about the three relationships which we experience: the relationship with our mind and body, the relationships we have with human beings, and the relationship we have with the natural world. How to fulfill these three fundamental relationships in a way which is meaningful, through which we can experience joy, and also moral. Yeah? How do we fulfill these three relationships? The internal one, between mind and body, between a husband and wife, between human beings, and between us and the creation. So the main goals we have in life, Father often says, become a true teacher, unity of words and deeds. If you're a teacher standing in a classroom telling children about how unhealthy it is to smoke, you can guarantee somebody's going to ask what?
Do you smoke?
Do you smoke, sir? And if you do, it's really embarrassing because you've lost credibility. Yeah? So you need to be a true teacher, unity of words and deeds. Practice what you preach. You know, to become a true parent means having the heart of a parent and the shoes of a servant. So what do parents do most of the time? Most of the time they go around serving their children, you know, wiping the bottom, washing their nappies, making their beds, cleaning, cooking, etc. The parents are basically serving their children, but they're doing it with the heart of a parent. When you do something with the heart of a parent, you don't think, okay, now, you know, I'm going to give you the bill. You know, you just give and you give and you give and you give unconditionally. And treating, so the heart of a parent also is to treat people justly and fairly. And to be a true owner means you look after the things that you own, and also you create a good environment, and also you share, freely you share what you have with others, because you want to take care of others. Okay, that's the end. Thank you all very much for listening so patiently and quietly. And I think we've got some tea and coffee and biscuits maybe, if anybody wants some. Thank you very much. Thank you.